Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Intertie Schedule Modeling Evolution on CAISO Balancing Area Intertie Stakeholder Workshop. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs. We have George Angelides, Milos Bosnak, and Jamil Daouk here in the room. And we also have Danny Johnson and Andrew Ulmer online as panelists as well. Just a couple housekeeping reminders. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. Any related transcription should not be reprinted. And this meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives. So we ask that you please engage in a respectful and professional manner. And please keep your comments brief and avoid repeating points that are already made to ensure everyone has the opportunity to participate. You can access the closed captioning on the bottom left of your screen, and the transparency viewer on the bottom right of your screen. Just be sure to refresh it prior to viewing. For raising your hand, please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making your comment. If you're connected through audio only, please press *3 on your device. And we ask that you pause about a few seconds before you speak. Sometimes there's a lag and it cuts off your introduction. And if you're connected on your phone, press *3 to raise your hand in the queue. You can also send your questions via chat to all panelists. And if you need any technical assistance during the meeting, please send a chat to the event producer. Today we're going to be beginning with meeting objectives and an introduction from Milos. Following that, we'll be hearing about generation aggregation point intertie gap tie model from George. And then, if time allows, we'll take a short break before continuing on George's discussion. And then, towards the end, we'll hear about upcoming workshops from Milos, and then we'll conclude with next steps. So with that, I'll turn things over to Milos to get us started.
Thank you, Christina, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion. Today's meeting really represents the kickoff of a series of workshops that's going to be focused on discussing with stakeholders evolution in intertie schedule modeling design, particularly on the CAISO interties. And this would be looking to evolve the design to move from the transitional design that will be in place at the EDAM go live and evolving that design to a more permanent structure for modeling intertie schedules, including particularly focusing today's discussion on the gap tie model design for modeling those intertie schedules. I'll go into that a little bit more here in the upcoming slides, just to level set some of the history, the background, and the context. And then, like Christina said, we'll turn it over to George to do a more educational discussion to help us all kind of level set on how do the different designs operate in practice, walk through some examples, and really provide a good grounding for all of us in this discussion that I think will pay dividends in upcoming discussions where we delve into some of the other areas that are impacted by that modeling design. But the goals of today's discussion for intertie schedule modeling for this particular workshop is really, as I said, to kick off the discussion on evolving the transitional intertie schedule model that will be in place in EDAM at the launch in May for the CAISO balancing area interties. As I'll touch on a little bit later, we made commitments to work with stakeholders to evolve that design beyond the transitional design that's currently in place, and I'll provide a little bit of that context a bit later, but today represents that start of those discussions. Today, we also want to host that educational session that George is going to walk us through on modeling of the CAISO balancing area interties under the SP tie model that's currently in place and will be in place at the EDAM launch for the CAISO interties, and contrast that with the gap tie design, which is the one that ideally we would like to evolve to, that is present on the other EIM and EDAM entity interties. But this educational discussion will look to compare those two designs and contrast them through a series of examples as well, and hopefully provide a good grounding for us to understand the distinctions and the differences in the accuracy of the modeling designs that I think, again, set the stage for future discussions on areas that are impacted by a change in modeling of intertie schedules. And then today we also want to, having had that educational discussion, we want to then work with you, stakeholders, to obtain your input and identify key topic areas that relate to this Intertie schedule modeling that we want to tackle in upcoming workshops. I'll have a slide where I lay out some of the areas that we think would be helpful to tackle and discuss in upcoming workshops, having established this educational basis for understanding the modeling designs. But we certainly want to get your input, whether it's today, at the end, once we go through George's presentation, but there'll also be opportunity to provide that kind of input through comments. So we really look forward to your engagement. Feel free to ask questions, especially as we go through the educational discussion. We'll look to go slowly, and feel free to stop us at any time and ask any kind of questions. If we go to the next slide, please. Just as a little bit of context, again, you may recall, if you've been participating over the last several months in some of our EDAM implementation workshops, roughly in August of last year, we started some of the implementation workshops regarding Intertie schedule modeling. And as part of those implementation workshops and working with stakeholders and in response to stakeholder feedback, we committed to retaining the existing Intertie schedule modeling design on the CAISO balancing area Interties on a transitional basis once the EDAM launches. So we would retain the existing structure that folks are familiar with in how Intertie schedules are modeled. We would retain that once the EDAM launches on the CAISO balancing area Interties, but we said that's on a transitional basis, subject to the commitment that we made to work with stakeholders to evolve that design, to improve the accuracy of the modeling design for Intertie transactions on our Interties. And as part of those discussions, we noted for stakeholders that we want to consider transition to what we see as a more accurate modeling design to the generation aggregation point or gap time modeling on the Interties. And through these discussions, the hope is to establish that educational foundation, work on any issues that may be related to that arise from those discussions that need to be addressed, but also allow time for stakeholders and for the market to consider the potential impacts to any kind of commercial arrangements that may result from a movement or a transition to that alternate or different modeling of Intertie schedules on the CAISO balancing area Interties. If we go to the next slide. Just to highlight, and this is a prelude a little bit into what George is going to look to illustrate and go into more depth, but you'll be hearing me use these terms throughout at least the initial portion of the presentation, so I wanted to just at least compare at a high level the existing modeling designs for Intertie schedules. There's the schedule point time modeling of Intertie schedules, or the SP time model. This is where Intertie transactions at scheduling points are modeled as either an injection for an import or an ejection for an export of energy directly at the Intertie location. And under the SP time model, we model in the full network model, effectively a fictional physical generator at the Intertie location in order to capture the effects of that energy injection or ejection on different transmission constraints that are modeled, as well as to model the consequent effects on the price formation and the LMP at those Intertie locations. The SP time model is currently in place for modeling Intertie schedule only on the CAISO balancing area Interties. It's not present in the EIM at the EIM entity Interties or in the EDAM at the EDAM entity Interties, but it's a function of the CAISO balancing area Intertie, where particularly there's robust Intertie bidding that occurs today. To contrast that with the gap tie design or the generation aggregation gap tie modeling design of Intertie schedules, this is where transactions at the Intertie locations are modeled either as imports or exports that are sourcing from aggregate physical generation in a adjacent or a neighboring balancing area. And this model considers the effects of that aggregate generation in that neighboring balancing area, and we model that generation in our full network model, but it looks at the effects of that aggregate generation on the different transmission constraints in the market footprint, and on that basis, it establishes also different components of the LMP. And this is currently in place at the EIM balancing area Interties in the EIM today, prior to EDAM go live. And then this type of modeling design of intertie schedules will also be in effect or in place at the EDAM balancing area interties or non-CAISO EDAM balancing area interties. So if you think of Pacificor and the CAISO as the first entities that are participating in the EDAM, the gap time modeling design will be how intertie schedules are modeled at the Pacificor interties with non-EDAM balancing areas. And the SP time model is currently in place and will be in place at day one on the CAISO balancing area interties with other non-EDAM balancing areas. I see Josh Arnold has a question, and we can take that at this point.
Yeah, can we please unmute Josh Arnold?
Good afternoon, Milos. Thank you for letting me ask a question. Can you hear me? Just to confirm.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So I might have a clarifying question on this page. I'm a little confused on a certain aspect. In these slides, it's saying that the model will be done at a neighboring balancing area. And I'm curious how that will be done, given that we have a requirement in our scheduling process to label the source location, and how this will be done if that source location is not in a neighboring balancing authority area. As an example, let's say it's in Montana, we have to wheel through BPA to get to the location, as in your later slides, the BPA Malin to Malin 500 intertie location. How would that work?
Yeah, let me check with George. I don't know if you probably are gonna address that in your educational session as well, but I don't know if there's anything we know now.
Well, I was actually going to keep it simple for today and using the examples, the adjacent balancing authority area, default generation aggregation point only, reserving discussion for other options and flexibility that this model can provide for another workshop. But I think that's why you see, Josh, here the language on the adjacent BAA. That's what we're focusing for this workshop. But you're correct. If the source is further out, we'll discuss in other workshops in the series other alternatives and different options that the participant may have using the gap time model, or you can use a BAA gap that is further out, not only the adjacent BAA, if there are rights that the participant has to get to the intertie wheeling through intermediate BAA. So I hope this is an answer to your question for now, and we'll discuss this topic in detail in later workshops if you allow us.
Thank you, George. That is absolutely an answer that clarified the situation very effectively. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any further questions at this time.
Sounds good. Let's go to the next slide. Just a little bit of the evolution and how we got to effectively the EDAM design or intertie schedule modeling. Just a little bit of the history as well. But with the launch of the EIM back now over a decade ago, 12 years ago, the introduction of the EIM also introduced the gap time modeling on the EIM balancing area interties. Again, non-CAISO interties, but as new EIM entities joined, that gap time modeling of intertie schedules was introduced on those particular interties. And the reason that was introduced for modeling intertie schedules is because it was considered comparatively more accurate as it sought to model the source of the intertie transaction of that intertie schedule at the intertie between an EIM and a non-EIM balancing area. It sought to model that intertie transaction as sourcing from generation in a neighboring balancing area, and that sought to improve the alignment with the power flows that we actually would see in real time, but also it improved management of congestion. This is to contrast that with, the SP time model where there's a fictional generator that's modeled at an intertie location, and then everything else flows from the effects of that fiction in terms of how the impact on power flows and congestion management. So moving to the gap time model, modeling things more precisely at least, or more comparatively more accurately to physical generation that's sourcing from actual generation in a neighboring balancing area was comparatively more accurate and provided certain benefits that George will also elaborate on and illustrate in his educational presentation later. And so once we moved to the EDAM design, we really sought to continue to improve on that accuracy and carrying forward that gap time modeling design of intertie schedules across now the fuller EDAM footprint, not only across those EIM areas that extended their participation into the EDAM, but also on the CAISO balancing area interties. We sought to extend that gap tie modeling design to improve that modeling of intertie transactions. If we go to the next slide. And so if you recall, and during the EDAM implementation workshops that we started last year, and I think they culminated in January or February this year, we sought to introduce and walk stakeholders through how movement to that gap tie modeling design would work on the CAISO interties, but stakeholders raised certain concerns with the impact to their commercial arrangements, concerns with understanding how that gap tie design would impact transactions on the CAISO interties, where we have robust intertie transactions and intertie bidding, so that through those implementation workshops, we decided on a transitional basis to retain the SP time modeling design for intertie transactions on the CAISO balancing area interties and not yet move to the gap tie modeling design. By retaining that SP time modeling design on intertie transactions of the CAISO balancing area on a transitional basis, market participants then can continue to submit intertie transactions on the interties between the CAISO and a non-EDAM balancing area, much as they do today, consistent with the practices that they have in place and hopefully without an impact on those commercial transactions. On the EDAM internal interties, which is the interties between the CAISO and another EDAM balancing area, for import intertie transactions, we also continue to support the SP time modeling design, but we limited those intertie transactions to resource adequacy and RPS contract import transactions where the scheduling coordinator does not know the source yet, or otherwise the source is outside of the EDAM footprint. In those limited instances, we continue to allow submission of bids at those EDAM internal interties on a transitional basis throughout this transitional design. And this is something as well that we'll look to talk through the intertie transactions and internal interties in upcoming workshops. But this transitional design for intertie schedule modeling on the CAISO balancing area interties will be in place until we replace it with a new modeling design, which is the purpose of these stakeholder transactions. Ideally, we would like to do this well in advance of the next tranche of EDAM entities joining, which is in fall of 2027. So we will be looking to have these workshops well in advance of that to see how we may want to evolve the design for intertie schedule modeling. But I do want to acknowledge that we do currently have a pending FERC filing on this transitional design, asking FERC to allow us to retain the SP time modeling design on the CAISO balancing area on a transitional basis. And we hope to receive an order to that in early April. So the scope and the purpose of these workshops is really to work through this transitional design, see what we want to evolve the modeling design to, and ideally move to the gap tie design, subject to all of the stakeholder discussions, any ancillary topic areas that we may need to evaluate that may be impacted by that, by moving to a different intertie schedule modeling design, such as what's the effect on RA imports, how does this work for transactions that used to be at EDAM internal interties. So we will touch on a number of these topics in this and upcoming workshops. If we go to the next slide. I want to just set the scope for today's discussion, and I said a little bit of that already in my introductory remarks, but today's workshop is really intended to be an educational discussion, one that sets the basis for understanding how modeling of intertie schedule works under the existing design and under the gap tie design, how it affects price formation under both of those designs. And I think that will help us then, working with stakeholders, compare the different approaches, but also working with your input, identify areas that we need to discuss at upcoming workshops. how do these modeling designs affect other aspects of transacting on the interties, including RA imports. We also, in upcoming workshops, want to talk more about transactions at EDAM internal interties, and moving away from those as we currently have a transitional design for that, but moving away from that, and how do we move away from that in an orderly way? What are the different things that we need to consider as well? We hope that with your input, you can help us identify what are those key areas and aspects that we want to focus on in upcoming workshops, and issues that may arise as we go through this educational session as well. I'll come back later a bit after George finishes his educational discussion, and there'll be room there then, having heard that education, for us to work together to identify what do we want to focus on in the next workshop. I have a slide towards the end that kind of provides some suggestions from what we think would be good to address in upcoming workshops in April, but certainly want to get your feedback either today or in written comments to better understand where would you like us to take the upcoming workshops and the different aspects of design that may be impacted. And if we identify any policy issues as well that need to be vetted, that's something that we can identify and try to move forward through this initiative and these set of workshops. So let me pause here. This is kind of the culmination of my introduction to the topic. George will next then delve into the educational comparative assessment of the gap tie and the SP tie design, where we certainly encourage any questions along the way. And George is going to walk through it slowly to make sure that you're all able to follow along. But any questions before we move on to the educational piece from George?
Taking a look here, I just saw a hand raised right now from Justin Cockrell. Go ahead, Justin.
Justin Cockrell, DC Energy. Have the gap tie definitions been published so that current CAISO only market participants are able to view them? There's some talk about where that might be published, but I can't remember where.
Justin, you're coming in a little faintly. I don't know if we caught all of your question. Could you get a little closer to your mic and repeat that?
He's asking if we've made the gap tie definition and published that out anywhere.
Right.
I believe as part of parallel ops must be already out because they're actually being used in the parallel operations, but we can look for an official announcement that has them all. We'll take an action item to publish them.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
And I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So I think we can continue on to George's section.
Yeah. Okay, we'll turn it over to George here now. We'll just switch. There we go.
Oh, thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't need the keyboard, I think, but the mouse will do. So let's make sure things are minimized. All right, so before we delve into some explanation and comparison between existing scheduling point and what we call the generation aggregation point, let's give some definitions and an overall description so that we're all on the same page when we describe these concepts. So first of all, what is the scheduling point? A general definition, it is a network location used for intertie scheduling. And how exactly it is used? That's where we distribute intertie schedules that clear the market for power flow and locational marginal price calculations. When we talk about generation aggregation point, it's not really a different concept. That is also a scheduling point, but it's an aggregate scheduling point. That means we don't distribute at a single location as the existing scheduling point for ISO interties, but to multiple locations potentially. And these locations are supply resources in a balancing authority area that is normally outside of the market area, because we have imports and exports from to that area into the market area. So we'll talk today for the most common generation aggregation point that we call default generation aggregation point, or DGAP. That includes all supply resources in that BAA where the energy is estimated to be generated that supplies the import or consumed from an export at an ISO intertie, since we're focusing on ISO interties today. And it's generally used for default, non-resource specific intertie participation. So the takeout point from here that I want to make sure it's clear is that the generation aggregation point is a scheduling point. So in the course of our discussion here, when we refer to scheduling points, we actually include both the existing scheduling points that are a single node for distribution and the potential generation aggregation points where we have an aggregate location for distribution. And we'll make a distinction with the two by specifically referring to existing scheduling point when we're talking about a single location for distribution as it is today used in the ISO market. So that's the scheduling point and the generation aggregation point. We will also talk about intertie, or short is tie. What is the tie? The tie is a logical transmission connection between BAAs at a boundary with at least one of them. Why do I say a logical transmission connection? Because it may correspond to one or more physical transmission lines, or very abstractly to the entire network that connects to BAAs that are not directly interconnected. For example, you could have a logical intertie defined between the ISO and a BAA that's not directly interconnected with the ISO, but maybe through BPA, for example, if the participant has rights to wheel through BPA and come to the ISO intertie. So you could define interties in a logical fashion. Where the interties are used is for tagging the intertie schedules for that specific intertie. At least one transmission leg should reflect that intertie before the delivery of the energy for an import or the takeout of the energy for an export. Interties may have intertie scheduling limits. All ISO interties have those. Intertie scheduling limits are different from power flow limits on physical transmission lines. They affect only the schedule that is tagged on that intertie. And when we're talking about schedule, it is very important to point out the difference between a schedule and a power flow. A power flow is a physical concept. It flows on physical transmission lines. The schedule is also a logical concept, which is tagged on a logical intertie and may not be equal, and it's generally not equal to the power flow on that intertie. The intertie scheduling limits that we use in ISO interties today, they're not changing, they're still there. We refer to them either as ISL, intertie scheduling limit, or intertie transmission corridor limit, ITC or ISL, different variations of those. We will not going to be spending time discussing this today because they affect both the existing scheduling point and the potential generation aggregation points exactly the same way, so it's not a point of differentiation. And we want to focus today on what is difference between using an existing scheduling point or a default generation aggregation point. So we're not going to talk about intertie scheduling limits that don't factor in that discussion. We'll probably bring them up for discussion later on in some other workshop to have a comprehensive understanding of everything that is relevant for intertie scheduling. So with these definitions, we can.
George, we do have a hand raised, if we
We
can
have,
take a moment.
yes, if we have. Let me
We
go to
have
the previous slide.
We have one question from Tong Wu.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tong.
Tong from WAPA. I have a clarification question. The relationship between scheduling point and the generation aggregation point and scheduling point and intertie. Are these one-to-one relationship or one-to-many or many-to-many? So for example, if I have a generation scheduling point or a gap, is there a unique scheduling point? So there's not going to be more than one scheduling point, and every scheduling point, there's only one gap, or there's going to be multiple. And also for the intertie, one scheduling point, one intertie, or one scheduling point can have multiple interties, or one intertie can have multiple scheduling points.
Tom, thanks for the question. As I said, I'm going to focus today on very simple concepts. So we're going to focus on a default generation aggregation point in an adjacent balancing authority area. But in general, the concept of the gap tie model is very flexible. So what you say is correct. It's possible to have multiple gaps associated with a single tie, or multiple ties associated with a single gap, depending on how we proceed through the stakeholder process of how we're going to effectuate support for intertie scheduling in the future after the transitional period. Okay?
All right. I'll wait until we get to the point. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tom. And taking a look here, see if there's any other hands raised. Just a reminder, you can raise your hand if you have any questions or write in your questions in the chat. Not seeing any other questions.
Thank you, Christina. All right. So we talked about the scheduling point and the tie. The two together form a combination, as we call it, the SP tie combination. This is an important feature for intertie scheduling because it uniquely identifies that intertie schedule. It tells us the scheduling point where we're actually going to distribute the intertie schedule for power flow calculations, and some of the LMP components for the SP tie depend on that location. And it tells us also the tie where the schedule will be tagged, and one of the LMP components depends on that tie, as we're going to go through here explaining the SP tie locational marginal price formation. And again, when I say SP, scheduling point, that covers both existing scheduling points and the aggregate scheduling points referring to gaps. So it's the same LMP formation applies to all of them. And it's also the standard LMP formation that exists for any network location and any resource as described in the tariff Appendix C of the ISO tariff, with one additional component for the SP tie LMP that we will talk here. All right, so some of the concepts should be familiar to you already. They're in our market today. We're not introducing any changes for the price formation. The first component of the LMP is the marginal energy cost. That is calculated as the shadow price of the power balance constraint for the BAA that it applies. That BAA is a BAA in the market area. We don't calculate this for BAAs that they don't participate in the market or outside of the market area. We refer to a shadow price. We need to explain what that is. Shadow price is a sensitivity, is a cost sensitivity for a constraint. So each constraint that is binding, and the power balance constraint is always binding for a BAA, has a cost sensitivity which basically tells us what's the savings that we can obtain in the minimization process that we're running here if we allow that constraint to be marginally relaxed. So it tells you essentially what's the marginal cost for holding the constraint binding. The traditional mathematical expression for the shadow price of a power balance constraint or the marginal energy cost is the Greek letter lambda. So lambda J is the marginal energy cost of BAAJ in the market area. The second component of the LMP, you also know it, is the marginal loss cost. And that's really the cost sensitivity of the active power losses. This is calculated at the location where we distribute the schedule, so at the scheduling point. And in the formula that you see there, what is in the parenthesis is what we call the marginal loss rate, which is a sensitivity that says how much the system loss will increase with a marginal injection, with a marginal schedule injected at the location in question, which is the scheduling point. If you multiply that with the cost of that energy to cover that marginal loss, which is the marginal energy cost, that product is your marginal loss cost component of the LMP. In the marginal loss rate, we use the loss penalty factor. It's a sensitivity that we calculate from the power flow solution, and it depends on the specific location. If the location is a generation aggregation point instead of an existing scheduling point, then this is an aggregate loss penalty factor that is calculated for every location of the distribution, and then you weigh all these up with the distribution factors for the gap, and you get an aggregate loss penalty factor. The calculation other than that is the same. The third component of the LMP, also known, is the marginal congestion cost. Here we have two different contributions for the SP type. The first contribution is what you see in every LMP everywhere on every node, and it reflects the marginal congestion contribution from binding power flow constraints within the market area. We don't enforce constraints outside of the market area. So each binding constraint in the market area has a contribution to a location, location I, for example, which is the shadow price of that binding power flow constraint. I use P here, not good notation. You may be thinking injection. I meant to be shadow price, which, as we described earlier, it's the sensitivity cost for enforcing that power flow constraint. And that is multiplied with the shift factor, which is another sensitivity that we calculate also from the power flow solution that tells us how much of a marginal injection at that location I flows on constraint K, on the transmission line K if it's a transmission line constraint. That solely depends on the interconnected network power system. So it may change depending on the network configuration, outages, transmission reconfigurations, but we use, like the standard in the industry, lossless shift factors, so they're not affected by losses. So it's a very straightforward sensitivity calculation that is used since the beginning of our market, and that is how we calculate the marginal congestion contribution from each binding power flow constraint. You add them all up, and then you have that contribution to the marginal congestion cost. Now, only for the SP-TIE LMP, and before I mention that, as we said, SP could be an aggregate scheduling point, in which case both the loss penalty factor and the marginal loss cost and the shift factor and the marginal congestion cost, they're aggregate. So we're using aggregate shift factors for caps, but other than that, the calculation, the price formation is the same. Now, what makes the SP-TIE LMP different than the LMP of a location of, let's say, a generator or load or any network location inside the balancing authority area is that SP-TIE has an additional component on the marginal congestion cost, which is the saddle price of any binding intertie scheduling limit on that intertie. ITC or ISL, maybe a group of ITCs. So whatever is binding the injection or schedule, I should say, on that intertie, if it's binding, it has a saddle price. The saddle price is directly added to the marginal congestion component. There is no multiplier than this, compared to the shift factor for the saddle price. It's directly added with 1, and that's why we're saying that the schedule is like having 100% impact on the intertie scheduling limit. It's like saying the scheduling, the shift factor for an intertie to its tie is 1, and every other resource in the system has a 0 shift factor, because only the intertie scheduling limit for the intertie for the SP tie that uses that tie has this contribution to the marginal congestion component. As I mentioned earlier, we're not going to talk today about the ITCs or ISL impact, because we're focusing here on the potential differences between the existing SP tie and the gap tie, and they both have this contribution from the intertie scheduling limit exactly the same way. So it's not a factor for comparison, so we'll sidestep this. We'll come back to it later for completion to describe how it affects any intertie schedule. The fourth component of the LMP is, of course, the marginal greenhouse gas cost. And for this one, there may be questions what it is for the specific SP tie. So first of all, the marginal greenhouse gas cost is, of course, the saddle price of what we call the greenhouse gas attribution constraint, which is formulated and enforced for each greenhouse gas regulation area. Let's focus from California for now as the greenhouse gas regulation area, or at least the piece of California that is in the market, because that's what matters for the market solution. So any location that is either within California, or if it's an intertie, any intertie that is internal to California, like for example, Tracy, it's an intertie between ISO and Bank, and any intertie at the boundary of California, like Malin 500, for example, it's an intertie between ISO Balancing Authority area and PPA. It's at the boundary of California. So any of these interties will bring into the SP tie LMP the marginal greenhouse gas cost of California. An intertie outside California, like an intertie, let's say, between Idaho and Pac West or Pac East, will not have that component, or more accurately, we can say, every LMP has this component, but for that specific intertie that is outside California, that component is 0. And this concludes my description at the high level of what is the price formation for the SP tie, including the concept of the gap tie. So let's open for discussions and questions if there are any on this topic.
Yeah, we have a couple hands raised. First, we'll go to Tong Wu. Go ahead, Tong.
Hi, Tong Wu from WAPA. I have 3 questions. Most of them are just simple clarification question. First, market area. My understanding that's EDAM footprint. Is that right?
It is the EDAM footprint in the day ahead and the EIM footprint in real time, correct.
Okay. And my second question is, this price definition formula is for the scheduling tie combination location. Is that right?
That is correct. It's the specific combination of SP and tie that this LMP is calculated for, and it's used in the settlement of the intertie schedules that use the same SP tie.
Okay. Now let me be a little bit more specific. Let's assume this scheduling point is at Malin between Pacific Corp and California ISO. And so there's a marginal energy cost component is associated with the BAA. Is this associated with the Pacific Corp or associated with the California ISO?
Very good question, Tom. I forgot to mention that. Thanks for bringing it up. When I say it's the set of price of the power balance constant of the associated BAA, what is this associated BAA? So the associated BAA is the BAA that receives the import or it gets, or the export comes out of it. So for an ISO intertie, the associated BAA is ISO. If we have an intertie between Idaho and PACE in EDAM, then the associated BAA is PACE for an import into PACE from Idaho or an export from PACE to Idaho.
Okay, all right, got you. So then this, if it's an import from Pacific Corp to the ISO, this BAA would be the ISO. If I have an export from ISO to Pacific Corp, then this lambda J would be for Pacific Corp. Is that right?
You are touching a complicated concept that I was not going to discuss in this workshop, which is what happens supporting intertie schedules on internal interties between EDAM BAAs.
No, this can be, okay, I'm sorry. Let me refine this. Okay, so this separate the G gap and the SP gap. The SP gap, let's say, how about BPA? Between BPA and ISO. So then this lambda J would be the ISO, regardless of import and export.
Always. Yes. So intertie schedules with an EDAM BAA, the source or sink is a BAA outside of EDAM. So in your case, that is BPA in your example, but the associated BAA is the BAA where the energy is imported to or exported from, and that's the ISO. So on any ISO intertie, the associated BAA is ISO. On interties that Pacific Corp has with, let's say, BPA, it will be the Pacific Corp Balancing Authority area.
Okay. So in this case, my understanding is if there's a transaction between BPA and ISO, if I have a transaction at the border between BPA and ISO, whether I import or export, it's going to be the same price because it's all based on the lambda J of the California ISO. Is that right?
That is correct. For
okay.
For an ISO intertie, whether it's an import or an export, the marginal energy cost is the same as the marginal energy cost of the ISO. But of course, it applies differently in the case of the import or export because the import is normally paid, whereas the export is normally charged, etc.
Right, yeah. So the price will be the same. It's just the quantity would be the opposite sign. If this is a transaction between Pacific Corp and California ISO, then the situation is more complicated. And I guess you would discuss that later. Is that right?
Correct. This is in the context of the transitional period and discussions of what happens after the transitional period. We're not going to discuss this today.
Okay. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Next in the queue, we have a question from Steve Keen. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, this is Steve Keen from Edison. I want to follow up a little on the greenhouse gas. When I was looking at like tie prices, there's oftentimes with each tie point or scheduling point, there seems to be a lot of potential different prices given. Am I correct in assuming that one of those is essentially the ISO? So like at Malin 500, there's a type one called Malin 500 that has the GHG cost in it. Then there's a number of other ones that don't. So the Malin 500 is for things that's within the CAISO's BAA. The other ones are outside of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, Malin 500, I would say it's at the border of California. Other interties that Pacific Corp has with other BAAs, they're outside California. So they don't have, or they have a zero marginal greenhouse gas cost component.
So the key distinction there, Steve, is the California border. If you have an intertie with the VEA area, that is not considered part of the California border, even though it's within the California BAA. So that intertie will not have greenhouse gas price.
I think a good example for this will be interties between Bank and California, as I mentioned, the Tracy, because BA is not a BA, so we don't really have interties, but.
Well, no, I just want to make the distinction. It's not a BAA definition.
Correct.
It's a California state definition. That's why I wanted to make that distinction.
Right.
Okay. I think I get this, but that's one of the things I've been trying to puzzle through is the GHG pieces. And
Yeah, so basically, Steve, very easy way to think of this is that any location that is inside California will have the marginal greenhouse gas cost of California. Any intertie location that is using a tie that is in a California boundary tie, like Malin 500, or an internal tie in California, like tracing, will also have the marginal greenhouse gas cost of California. Any other intertie, for example, Pacific Corp and Idaho, that will have a zero marginal greenhouse gas cost because it's outside California.
okay, so when we're talking about resources bidding into California, that would be at one of these ties that has the GHG that's within California when they put their bid in. So
when you are bidding in California, if that intertie is within the California boundary, you don't need to put a separate GHG bid.
You actually cannot.
You cannot. If it is an intertie that is modeled to be outside of the California state boundary, then you can put a greenhouse gas bid.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm not seeing any other questions at this time, so I think we
All right.
can continue on.
All right, so now that we talked about the concepts, practically, what is the process for a scheduling coordinator to participate in intertie scheduling? And we'll focus in here on the ISO Balancing Authority area interties. So first of all, the scheduling coordinator has to select a tie where the schedule will be tagged. And that decision really depends on the transmission that the scheduling coordinator has to acquire from external transmission service providers to come to that intertie, because they will be required to tag the schedule, and that the various transmission legs on the tag should reflect the rights that the participant has acquired. The second decision is to select the scheduling point that is associated with the tie so that you can use an SP tie combination for your schedule. We'll look at two examples here of selecting the existing scheduling point of Malin 5 NO1 for the Malin 500 intertie. All our existing scheduling points today, they have a one-to-one SP to tie association. So sometimes the distinction between the SP and the tie is trivialized because, hey, it's one-to-one, so there can only be one. But we want to emphasize here that it's really a combination of two different things, the SP and the tie, because in general, those two could be more than one-to-one, as Tong Wu asked earlier, and the way I responded, that we're going to talk about that in future discussions. So today we'll see the first one, the existing scheduling point at Malin 5 NO1, that's used today in our markets. And we'll see examples also for an alternative, which is the default generation aggregation point of the adjacent BAA for Malin 500, which is Bonneville Power Administration. Once the SP and the tie are selected, we have now a SP tie combination that uniquely identifies your intertie schedule features. Then you can register an import or an export system resource at that SPTI, and that process is not different than registering system resources today through the, in our master file. Or alternatively, you can define an intertie transaction in Cyber without registering the resource. You define it on the fly, specifying the SPTI in your intertie transaction bid, and Cyber generates the resource ID for you. That does not persist from day to day. It's good only for the trading day. You have to redefine it again by bidding again on it if you want, on that one or any other the next trading day. I have to mention here that in some interties that are not ISO interties, whether you can use an intertie transaction, it really depends on the particular EDAM entity specifications. For example, we know that Pacificorp is not going to support intertie transactions. So for imports, exports into and out of Pacificorp PAAs, the participant needs to register system resources for that purpose. But for the ISO, for ISO interties, we support both. And in fact, we also support intertie generating resource registration instead of system resources. We call these TGs, and they represent technical characteristics of a generator, of a physical generator that provides the energy for imports. And it's important to note that you see the last bullet there, once you have all of this defined, you can submit a bid, which could be an economic bid or a self-schedule for that resource at that SPTI. So economic bids today are only allowed on ISO interties. EDAM and EIM entities today do not support intertie bids at their interties. It's their prerogative at this point. There is a narrow exception for that, and that's why I mentioned the TG. The narrow exception is for external designated network resources that have contractual obligations to serve demand in the BAA, Pacificorp in this case. And we model this as TGs, and for this narrow exception, an economic bid can be submitted as support. Okay, let's open up for questions.
We have one question in the queue right now from Tong Wu. Go ahead, Tong.
Tong, you may be on mute.
Can we try and mute him?
This is Tong Wu from WAPA. I have a quick question. So George, you mentioned register and import-export system resource at SPTI. We currently do business with the Northwest, and we have registered resource IDs, and we're using right now. After May 1st, do you suggest that we need to register this resource ID again using BPA _ DGAP, or we can use the existing resource ID?
Well, as you know, during the transitional period, you can use the existing resource ID at the existing SPTI because we will be supporting the existing SPTIs for the transitional period. If we switch after the transition period to the GAP-TIE model, and in particular here, for your example, maybe the BPA DGAP for Malin 500, then it will be a simple process to redefine or re-register your system resource using that GAP-TIE now instead of the existing SPTI.
Okay.
And you know, at that point, we'll also have discussion about how the ISO can facilitate this. Maybe we can do this automatically for you, taking all the existing SPTIs and floating them to the adjacent DGAP-TIE. We'll talk about it.
So for now, during the transition period, we don't have to do anything. Business as usual, everything would flow through ISO system, basically, right?
Correct. It's business as usual.
Okay. Thank you.
And that was one of the elements in the transitional period. We wanted to provide a transitional period for scheduling coordinators and market participants in general to you know, when we start EDAM, to have an easy transition into it without having to do a lot of work for redefining intertie resources or renegotiating commercial contracts and things like that.
So Tom, the only thing that I want to put a caveat on the business as usual is going to be related to whether or not that intertie is considered within the greenhouse gas region and you are serving load within the, or outside the greenhouse gas region and you're serving load within the greenhouse gas region. The only big difference is if that intertie is outside the greenhouse gas region, you would want to put in some greenhouse gas bid so that that energy, when we run the pricing run for greenhouse gas, it includes you and you can get attribution. It can be considered to be serving ISO load. So if you're at Malin, no change.
Yeah, Malin, no change, Tom. I think James was referring to, let's say you have an import to, let's say, Pacific Northeast, for example, from Idaho, where normally the SPTI there does not include the marginal cost component, or it includes the marginal cost component of base, which is 0. If you want to participate in the CARB program for regulating greenhouse gas imports, the system flexibility that we have right now in our greenhouse gas model allows for that SPTI, for imports at that SPTI, to submit a greenhouse gas bid and get a greenhouse gas attribution for being accounted to be serving demand in California.
Yeah, but I just want to make also sure that, and this is why I brought up the UDC territory of Valley Electric, any intertie that is at the boundary of the ISO border that is modeled in Nevada, you would want to put a greenhouse gas bid in for that to be considered to serve load within California greenhouse gas areas. So if you're serving SCE's load, you'd want to put a greenhouse gas bid on it. It could be a $0 bid, but you'd want to put a bid on it.
Thank you. And Tom, looks like you lowered your hand, so if you have any follow-up questions to that, feel free to raise your hand and respond. And I just wanted to make a quick announcement that we've had some questions in the chat, but we've responded to them privately in the chat, so let us know if you have any follow-up questions to your questions that you wrote in.
So we address the questions in the chat before we go to the example? Okay.
We already,
There we have it.
yeah, we already got to them, so we can continue on.
We responded to them via chat.
Yeah.
Oh, you responded too?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's proceed to some examples. So, first we'll talk about an import example using the existing SPTI, Malin 5N01 and Malin 500. So the scheduling point is the Malin 5N101 network location, and Malin 500 is the intertie, so that's the SPTI. So that's between ISO and BPA. We assume in this example that we have 2 ISO generators and a load, of course, and BPA has 3 generators. That's all of the generation in BPA in this example, and a load, of course. And we also have the Malin 500 intertie between BPA and ISO. And at that location, at that SPTI, we have an import system resource, all right? And also important in the picture, we have path 26 in ISO that we assume generator 1 is north of path 26, generator 2 is south of path 26. and we'll try to solve the system and see how it works with the SPTI. The bids for the ISO generators, G1, 800 megawatts at $20, G2, 600 megawatts at $30. The system resource import is at $10, okay? Of course, we don't have bids for the external generators in BPA because they're outside of the market. We don't solve optimally systems outside of the market. As you can see here, for serving the load in the ISO, generator 1, after the system resource is fully selected at $10, generator 1 is a cheaper generator, but it's north of the SP26, of path 26, I'm sorry. So we won't be able to take all its energy because it will create congestion on path 26, so we'll have to mitigate the congestion by providing some counterflow from G2 at a slightly higher price. What's important to note here is the 6 factors that we'll use to solve this problem. So I note there that there is a BPA-T dig-up that includes all the supply resources in BPA, those 3 in the example, G3, G4, and G5. And even though this example is using the existing SPTI, we're actually going to partially use that BPA-D dig-up as we use today in our day-ahead market, where we only have the existing SPTIs. Why we're using the dig-up for BPA, and in general, the dig-up of any external BAA, is to distribute generation in those external systems to meet their demand forecast, so that when we solve the market, we do that before we even start the market, so that when we solve the market, we have an approximate representation of what is the loop flow through the ISO system, which is our market, making sure that we have an accurate power flow solution and congestion management while we solve the market. So the dig-up is not a new concept that is proposed with EDAM or even with EIM, because we have it in EIM. It predates EIM as well. This is what we were doing since the beginning of MRTU, where we had external network representation, and this is how we distribute generation to meet in each external BAA its demand forecast. So here for this example, we assume generation distribution factors for the BPA dig-up of 50, 30, and 20%. So we distribute 1,000 megawatts of generation based on this generation distribution factors to meet the BPA demand forecast, 1,000 megawatts in this example. The shift factor to path 26 from that dig-up is 0.34. And that's an aggregate shift factor. That's essentially, if anyone asks how we calculate that, it's the shift factor for each of the locations weighted by the generation distribution factor, and then sum them all together. So that's the aggregate shift factor, 0.34. The shift factor from the SPTI, the existing SPTI at Malin 5 NO1 to path 26 is 0.4. It's slightly larger because that location is electrically closer to path 26. So an injection at Malin 5 NO1, it has a larger contribution to the southbound flow of path 26 compared to what the BPA dig-up does. And this will be essential later on in our comparison between using the existing SPTI and using the BPA dig-up for our market. Someone may ask, how did the existing SPTI come up for the ISO? Why it was Malin 5 NO1 and not the BPA dig-up that we're using already for distribution of external generation to have a representative power flow through the system that represents external systems. And the answer is historical. Essentially, when we started the market, even before MRTU, the day-ahead market for the ISO had only the ISO balancing authority area in it, and we had no representation in the network model of any external systems. So the interties, the ISO interties, on the other side, there was nothing. It was just a big generator model that we were using to model imports and exports at that location. So that's why the SP type predates everything. And it's a concept that came from the beginning of the market where we didn't have any other option for distributing an import or export schedule. The only option was the location of the intertie. Okay. Later on, of course, we expanded the network model, and now we have the ability to represent external systems and their impact in our market solution, and we use the DGAP for this purpose, as we saw here in this example. Also important for the solution here is the shift factor that G1 and G2 have on path 26. And we assume here for simplicity and ease of calculations that the shift factor of G1 is 0.5, meaning half of its injection flows on path 26 southbound, and G2 has a shift factor of minus 0.5, so it creates a 50% counterflow on path 26. We're setting the limit here for this example on path 26 to 480 megawatts, and we'll proceed finding the solution, but I want to make a quick stop here to make sure that the setup for the example is fully understood before we go on trying to solve this. I see Steve has a question.
Yeah, we have a few questions coming in. First, we can go to Steve, and then we'll take some written comments.
Yeah?
First, we'll take Steve's question, and then we'll take some written questions.
Steve, go ahead.
Hi, Steve Keen from Edison. A couple questions to try and help me understand. The load in the CAISO, is that just general load, or is that above or below path 26?
So it's the demand forecast for the ISO balancing authority area. Obviously, some of it is above. I mean, north of path 26, some is below. It doesn't matter for the example. We assume the demand forecast is self-scheduled. So consider it the BAA load. It has some distribution, but it's not relevant here because in this example, we only consider ISO balancing authority area to be in the market. So that demand forecast for the ISO is the reference for the shift factors. So wherever and how it's distributed on path 26, north or south of path 26, it's reflected in the shift factors of G1 and G2. And we assumed here that one has 0.5, the other minus 0.5, with a particular distribution of that demand forecast, whatever that is. Is that okay, Steve?
Yeah, I'm still wondering, like, you're showing that there's a path flow limit of 480 on path 26, though, and doesn't like whether that's binding or not depend on where the power is needed?
Correct, and the power is needed at the demand forecast, and that demand forecast, the way it's distributed, whatever with the load distribution factors, constitutes in this example, the reference for calculating the shift factors. So that 0.5 shift factor of G1 says that if I inject 1 megawatt at G1 to serve 1 megawatt of the demand forecast, wherever it's distributed, half a megawatt of that will flow southbound on path 26. Okay?
Okay, that's making sense now. One other question, I just want to go back. The shift factor, the 0.34, that's shown for the BP, the D gap. You have the D gaps, you have the shift factors for the 3 generators, and then you show the 0.34. That's the shift factor for Malin 500 or the Malin 5? Is that correct?
No, the shift factor for the D gap is the percentage of the injection at the D-gap that flows southbound on path 26. So it doesn't have anything to do with Malin 5 NO1. Malin 5 NO1 has its own shift factor, which is 0.4. So as you can see, you will see the calculations on the next page here that those 1,000 megawatts at the D-gap of PPA, with the shift factor, with the aggregate shift factor of 0.34, they contribute 340 megawatts on the flow of path 26 from north to south. Okay?
Okay. All right, thanks.
And since we're at this point, these numbers that I picked for the shift factors of the D-gap and the Malin 5 NO1, I didn't really pull them out of thin air. They're really representative of shift factors that I showed in an earlier workshop. I don't know, it was December or January, some there, where I showed shift factors for the D-gap and the existing scheduling points specifically for Malin. And they do fall into that range. So the D-gap had about 0.34, and the Malin 5 NO1 had about 0.4. So they're representative. Of course, they're not exact, and as I said earlier, they changed because of network reconfigurations and everything. But they're not, they're not, I didn't pull them out of thin air. I didn't make them up, okay? So they represent reality.
George, this is Danny from the ISO. I kind of wanted to answer Steve's question and maybe take a step back to, if you think of this theoretically, it makes sense. We're saying that if you have a 1,000 megawatt injection right at Malin, it's going to have a 400 megawatt impact on path 26. If you have that same 1,000 megawatt injection mapped to the BPA D-gap, it's going to have a 340 megawatt impact, and that's just because you have more transmission elements with a impedance between where the injections are occurring and where the binding constraint is. So more of that power is going to flow through the rest of the network model, possibly across NVE system, the front range. A small amount will flow elsewhere and not directly down through Malin, eventually to the path 26 constraint.
Okay,
Right,
that's
thank you,
helpful, thank you.
Yeah, so Malin 5 NO1, the way, on a different way to say it, is electrically closer to path 26 than the BPA D-gap.
And that's why what you said, George, earlier is super important. Back before there was a full network model where the entire Western interconnection was being optimized, it didn't really matter. But as soon as you go towards a full network model that all of the transmission elements are being considered, the D-gap modeling is always going to have a more accurate power flow onto any constraint than just a point injection like the Malin 5 N101.
Right, thank you, Danny. And I think we'll show that in the example. Yes, go ahead, Christina.
We have a few written comments. It looks like Joe Liu has his hand raised. Joe, did you want us to read the question that you just wrote in, or are you going to be asking it? If we could unmute Joe.
This is Joe Liu from CDWR. No, I actually had a second question. Is the energy at SR1 being injected on the BPAT side or the CAISO side? Because I'm trying to make, because it looks like it's an export in this case, or is it an import?
Thank you for bringing that question. So it's an ISO resource. All right, that system resource, it's part of the ISO power balance constraint because it's used for the ISO BAA. So that's why I saw it on the south side, if you wish, of the Malin 500 interconnection. Now, the convention I'm using here is that if you see the arrow going into the bus, like all the generators here, that's an injection. So if it's an intertie, it's an import. You see the arrow going out of the bus, like the loads, this is a demand, a takeout. So that SR1 injects to the bus, so that's an import. It's a positive injection. Make sense?
I thought this is in relative to CISO. So CAISO's sending energy out. Wouldn't that make it an export?
No, what happens is that the system resource is like a generator sitting at Malin 5 NO1. So
Okay.
like any other generator, this is a generator, and we clear the market for that energy serving the ISO demand forecast. It doesn't mean it goes out. It won't go anywhere out because outside you have generation that matches the demand outside, so it's balanced. So all that energy that is injected in Malin 5 NO1 will come to serve anything that is scheduled out of that will serve the ISO demand. As I said, we only have the ISO balancing authority area in the market here in this simple example. There's no Pacific Corp. And of course, what matters for the shift factor that we said is 0.4 is that this energy is not going to flow 100% of it on path 26. Some of it's going to flow through the external network around path 26 as well. So that's why you have a shift factor of 0.4 for that location. Make sense?
So, okay, so the BPAT is point. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
we'll see how this plays out when we calculate the solution, okay?
Next, we have a few written comments. From Monica Sweeney, she asked, is there a place we can find a list of all the ties inside or outside GHG region, greenhouse gas region?
I don't know if we have that. I mean, as I said, it's all the locations inside California. So when we start the market, these locations inside California is basically the portion of the ISO balancing authority area that does not include VEA, which is in Nevada.
So George, we can take that back
Yeah,
and potentially create a list and put it up.
I think we should. I just don't know if there is one already as part of the parallel operations.
There is not one currently published as part of our current
Can you
operation.
make a commitment to produce one?
We will make a commitment to try to produce one, try to figure out where to publish it.
Like the notes?
Well, we could put one out potentially as a Excel spreadsheet, but I think it's gonna be, where are we gonna tell them it's going to be? So as greenhouse gas regions change,
Yeah.
we're gonna have a consistent place, but we have to take that back, but we can create a temporary, list.
Okay, yeah, I know we have it in the master file, and we do publish technical information out of the master file and spreadsheet, so we'll probably, we'll take an action item to add a tab on that spreadsheet that has all this information about, the interties, the.
Greenhouse gas region versus
So
land.
we'll add that there, make sure it's available, and it's different for day ahead and real time. It's very important because what's considered California inside the market changes as the market area changes from day ahead to real time. So we'll take an action item to include that information in the technical information that's already published.
Thank you.
And I'll be right back.
Next, we have a question in the chat from Joe Liu. I believe it was addressed. He asked, to clarify in the current examples, CAISO is explaining how current existing SP ties will work under the new ADAM rules during the transition period in May?
That is correct. In the transitional period, we support the existing SP ties, so that is correct.
Yeah, the only nuance is it's not new. This is how it works today and how it's going to continue during this transitional period. So nothing is changing in terms of this modeling of the SP tie model. We're just trying to set the stage on the SP tie model, how it works, so that we can contrast it in the next set of examples with the gap tie design.
Thank you. And next, before continuing, I'm just going to go through and read the responses to some questions we had in the chat so that everyone's aware of them. First, from Harold Phipps, he asked if the recording will be made available on the CAISO website, so I posted the link in the chat for everyone to see. Then Joe Liu asked, when the transition period ends, will SB ties be replaced by gap ties for only CAISO, Pacific Core, or all ties between CAISO and other BAAs? I let Joe know that for all CAISO interties subject to these stakeholder discussions.
Yeah, and I'll just note there, yeah, the intent is that once you move to a different design, other than the SP tie design, if we move to the gap tie design, it would be across all of the CAISO interties, not just between us and another EDAM balancing area. But again, that's subject to these stakeholder discussions and the different things that we'll need to consider as we move towards that new design.
It is. Thank you. So next we received another question from Joe Liu asking, are all of the new gap ties currently in map stage? If no, when will map stage testing for gap ties be available? I let Joe know, no, not yet. We have a plan to publish and price the pair as part of Go Live, but not open to use for scheduling. We will be following up with any updates. Did anyone want to add anything there?
Well, actually, gap ties are used already for Pacific Corp in parallel operations, but we won't be using gap ties for ISO because the parallel operation is supposed to represent what happens in day one, and in day one of the transitional period, we will continue supporting the existing SP ties. So I think for the gap tie, we'll probably have to wait for later.
Thank you. And those are all the written questions, but we did just get another hand raised from Tong Wu. Tong, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do have a question. After May 1st, when Pacific Corp joins EDAM, if I have the transaction at Malin, do I have a choice to use SP tie? If the power is going through Pacific Corp system, let's say I buy power at COB, and then if the delivery is going through Pacific Corp, do I have the choice of using SP tie during the interim?
SP tie export from Malin 5 and 01, you can export energy from the ISO there, but I need to understand where it's going. As you said Pacific Corp, but what's the destination? Is it
Destination is, they say, ISO PGA ED-Lab. That's the destination. I make a purchase from Northwest. The delivery point is California, Oregon border, COB. And then the supplier choose to deliver through Pacific Corp system instead of a BPA system to Malin. And today there's a choice. You can go through Malin through BPA, or you can go to Malin through Pacific Corp. But after May 1st, if the supplier choose to deliver that power through Pacific Corp system, am I forced to use the DGAP?
Tom, in your example, the rights being used are Pacific Corp making it an internal connection, internal intertie between two EDAM entities, which would be a transfer.
I think he's talking about BPA to Pacific Corp West.
No,
Northwest,
not the BPA. Just
from
Pacific Corp to ISO.
Yeah, using the rights.
The source is ISO?
The source is Northwestern. It wheels through PAC using PAC rights to get to Malin to ISO. Internal intertie.
Tom, can we have an off-site discussion on this? I think we're going to lose the audience. So there's a lot of
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, let's send
okay.
us an email and we'll either reply or have a conference call with you to walk through this. Okay?
Okay.
You can
Thank
email
you.
us at ISO-stakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com, and we'll get that to George.
Okay. CAISO stakeholder affairs.
I'll write it in the chat.
You've got George directly. You can reach out to him as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And those are all the questions I'm seeing right now, so I think we can
All right.
continue.
Thank you. All right, let's go find the solution in the day-ahead market then for this example. Showing green numbers for the day-ahead solution. Let's walk through that solution together. So, first of all, we have some flow contribution to path 26 from the DGAP in BPA because of our modeling of external systems, as I mentioned. So we have 1,000 megawatt injection at the BPA-T DGAP to serve their load. We have a shift factor of 0.34, so that injection results in a 340 megawatt southbound flow on path 26. So that's given, it's there. Okay, we're not optimizing that because we're not scheduling optimally resources in BPA, and this is the reason of why we model it, because it already consumes 340 megawatt of the path 26 limit, so we want to take that into consideration when we solve our market. SR1, the import system resource, bid at $10, it's the cheapest resource, so we'll take, well, it will clear the market first. We're doing superposition here, so to speak. So once that 100 megawatt import clears, the power flow contribution from that to path 26 with a shift factor of 0.4 that we assumed earlier, there's another 40 megawatt flow on path 26 southbound. So we already have accounted 380 megawatts of flow out of the 480 megawatt limit. There is 100 megawatt room, so we'll dispatch generator G1, which is the next generator in the merit order of bids, okay? And because it has a shift factor of 0.5, we can dispatch 200 megawatts of generator G1, taking over the 100 megawatt room that we had on path 26. We cannot dispatch unilaterally now generator G1 beyond the 200 megawatts because that will cause, that will violate the flow limit of 480 megawatt on path 26. So now we have to do some congestion management. And G2 provides a counterflow with a shift factor of minus 0.5 on path 26. So to meet the remainder of the demand, which is 1,000 minus 200 for G1 minus 100 for the SR1 that cleared the market so far, we have another 700 megawatts that we need to load to serve. And to not violate path 26, which is sitting now at 480 megawatts at the limit, we have to take energy evenly from both G1 and G2 at the same rate because they have shift factors of 0.5 and minus 0.5. So if we schedule them in tandem, they cancel each other out for this incremental flow, and we stay within the limit of path 26 at 480 megawatts. That's congestion management in its simplest form. So we have a balance of 700 megawatts that we need to generate. So we'll take 350 from G2 and 350 from G1 plus the original T100. You have 550 scheduled. So the optimal solution has the import at 100 megawatts, G1 at 550 megawatts, and G2 at 350 megawatts. And if we do a calculation here with the shift factors to add up the flow, we have already 380 for the BPA D gap and the import, 275 from G1 minus 175, counterflow from G2. It comes up to 580 megawatts, so that's the correct solution. We can go now to the next step of calculating the LMPs, okay? All right. First, we want to calculate the marginal energy cost for the ISO balancing authority area. That's the saddle price of the power balance constraint for the ISO. We can find out the MEC by finding out what's the cost for serving the next increment of load. And the next increment of load, so that we don't violate path 26, so path 26 stays at 480 megawatts, it can be served by, again, we have to schedule G1 and G2 in tandem, so half a megawatt from G1, half a megawatt from G2. That half a megawatt from G1 is at $20. The half a megawatt from G2 is at $30 based on the bid. So we get sort of like an average price at $25. This is the cost for serving the next increment of demand in the ISO balancing authority area, and that's your marginal energy cost for the ISO balancing authority area. Next, we have to find the saddle price for the path 26 congestion. the way we find the saddle price, as I mentioned earlier, it's a cost sensitivity. So if we could allow one more megawatt flow on path 26, so let's say we relax the limit from 480 to 481, then we would like to use G1 first because it's cheaper, right? 1 megawatt room on, so what happens here is that we can shift generation from the expensive generator of G2 into G1 until we use that 1 megawatt room from the relaxation. And if we do that, if we shift 1 megawatt from G2 to G1, essentially with the shift factors, you can see that 1 megawatt from G1 uses the half megawatt of the room, and reducing G2 by 1 megawatt, it reduces the counterflow by the other half a megawatt, so we get half a megawatt increased flow, plus another half a megawatt from reduced counterflow, where it just occupies fully the 1 megawatt of the relaxation, and we achieved savings by shifting a megawatt from $30 to $20, so we got a $10 savings. So $10 is the saddle price of the path 26 congestion. Now that we have the MEC and the saddle price and the shift factors, we can calculate the LMPs. So for G1, 25 is the marginal energy cost. We subtract its shift factor 0.5 times 10, which is the saddle price of path 26, and we find $20. For G2, same thing, but the shift factor is minus 0.5, so we add now $5 to the MEC of 25. We find a $30 LMP for G2. Not surprisingly, these LMPs are their actual bids for G1 and G2. Essentially, they're both marginal, setting the price at their location. A phenomenon that is well seen in the case where you have power flow congestion and you solve it with congestion management with generation north and south of the constraint in tandem. What's the LMP for the SPTI for Malin 5N01, Malin 500? Okay, that is similar calculation as we have seen before, $25 the MEC. We subtract the product of the shift factor, which is 0.4 now for that location, times 10 megawatts, the saddle price of path 26, and we find a price of $21. As you can see, the price is usually, and you see here in this example, depressed on locations that they cause congestion, which are locations north of path 26, both G1 and the import, they have a reduced price compared to the MEC of $25 because they cause congestion. The LMP on the south side for G2 is above the MEC because it provides counterflow. It encourages generation. And the import price is higher than the G1 price because the contribution of the import to the congestion is less. G1 has a 0.5 shift factor, whereas the SR1 has 0.4 shift factor. So that's why you see its LMP is at $21 compared to $20 for the generator one. All right, so let's see if there are any questions on that solution for the day-ahead market.
Thanks, George. We have a couple questions written in the chat. I'll read these two that are pretty similar before passing it off to Milos. First from Callie Wells, asking if we can bring this back to the group discussion from Tom. She thinks that there are others on this call that would like to understand exactly how entities are supposed to bid imports on day one. And then Dan Williams from the Energy Authority said nothing, that he's also interested in hearing the answer to Tom's question as well.
All right, of course. We'll talk to Tongu on that specific example, and next time we'll bring it up to the whole stakeholder forum here, and we'll answer the question publicly.
Great. And I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. So I think.
Okay, so this is day ahead, okay? Now we'll move to real time and see what real time is going to be. For simplicity here, and so that we be able to compare between the approaches, we assume that the demand forecast was accurate in the day ahead. So loads are the same, like in the day ahead. The bits don't change, same bits in real time. So what is different though? We mirror the cleared import into the ISO with an export from BPA. Because now BPA in the real-time market is part of the market area. We will be doing dispatch for BPA resources as well. So what was seen as an import to the ISO in the day ahead, it has to have an export from BPA in real time, because the energy is not really generated at the Malin 5 N01 bus, but it's really generated in the BPA generators in this example, G3, G4, G5. So the way to accomplish this, we mirror day-ahead schedules into an EIM BAA with a mirror system resource, that's the MSR. This is not a new concept. We use it from the beginning of our market. And that mirror system resource always has the same location as the import or export that it mirrors. So using the existing SPTI, that mirror is sitting at Malin 5 N01. And it's an export. You see that the arrow is taking energy from the bus. So that's an export, and it's a BPA. It's in BPA, that export. It's exported from BPA, so it's part of the BPA's power balance constraint in real time. Now we have a power balance constraint for BPA because it's in a real-time market. What's the effect of the mirror system resource? From a network flow perspective, it really cancels the day-ahead schedule. So the day-ahead import of 100 megawatts into the ISO is canceled in terms of power flow terms with a 100 megawatt export at the mirror system resource export from EPA. That establishes a very important feature for the real-time market, that essentially we're canceling an injection that was not physical. The injection at Malin 5 N01 was an artifact of the day-ahead market. There is no energy injected in real time on this bus. So to represent that, we cancel it with an equal and opposite injection. So for an import, we're using an export mirror system resource from the other BAA, and that establishes the feature where the logical injection is canceled, and what remains in the network is really physical generation. Because of the BPA power balance constraint that says that the sum of generation BPA, including this mirror system resource, which is a negative injection, it's an export, must equal the demand, essentially it will force in the solution that 100 megawatt export to be picked up by the BPA physical generation. That's what the power balance constraint will do. So we assume here that it's picked up. We don't have the bits or the BPA generators in this example, but for comparison purposes, we assume that it's picked up with the same distribution factors that we use for the DGAP. So that 100 megawatt is picked up by G3 for 50, G4 for 30, and G5 for 20 megawatt. Now you have a power balance for BPA. Okay? So your real time solution now, it's really real. The energy is actually generated from the BPA DGAP. So, point that I want to make here, even if we're using the existing SPTI in the day-ahead market, through the use of the mirror system resource, this actually floats into the BPA DGAP, or in the actual BPA generation based on bits. In this example, the BPA DGAP. How does the result change now? If we do similar calculations like what we did for the day ahead, okay, what's the flow from the BPA DGAP in real time now to path 26. The shift factor is 0.34 for an 1100 megawatt generation. So that's 374 megawatts. The effect of the system resource is canceled with the mirror system resource, so that doesn't even factor out. So now we have 374 megawatts for the 480 megawatt limit. So now in real time, we have an additional 6 megawatt room compared to the day-ahead solution, right? Because in the day-ahead solution, the dig up for BPA plus the import at Malin 5 and 01 was generating a contribution of 380 megawatts. Now we have the contribution at 374 megawatts, having 6 megawatts of additional room on path 26. Why is that? Because the injection actually moved from Malin 5 and 01 to the BPA dig up, which is electrically a little bit more distant. So although in the day ahead, the import seemed to be having an effect of 40% on the path 26 because of the existing SP tie that was used, in reality, the impact of the import is reduced. Going to the dig up, it's only 34%. So that leaves you room now for your real-time market to achieve a better optimal solution on the day ahead because it has a 6 megawatt room for optimization before it can hit the limit of 480 megawatts for path 26. So because of this, okay, you can shift generation from G2 to G1. Okay, again, you dispatch them in tandem. One reduces counterflow, the other increases the on-flow. So we shift 6 megawatt of generation from G2 to G1, and we stay within the limit. So the optimal solution has G1 now in real time at 556 megawatt instead of 550 from the day ahead, and G2 reduced from 350 to 344 megawatt in real time. What happens to the LMPs? I engineered this solution so that we have the same LMPs in real time so that we're able to have a comparison. So the LMPs don't change because the bits didn't change. And again, G1 and G2 are also marginal in the real time, like in the day-ahead market. So you still have the same LMPs in real time that you have in day-ahead. However, you have a more efficient solution. It's more optimal because you shifted 6 megawatts of more expensive generation from G2 to less expensive generation for G1. So you have a lower cost solution that was made to happen because of the lower contribution of the BPA dig-up injection to path 26 to our constraint. All right, so let me take a breather here to see if there are any questions on the solution.
Thanks, George. Pausing a moment here, see if we have any hands raised. It looks like Danny from CAISO has his hand raised. Danny, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to add one observation, which George is highlighting. Under the SP-tie model, the settlement difference is just within BAs who are participating fully in the day ahead in real time. So this example, LMPs are the same. In the real world, they might not be, so there is a settlement implication. On the WEIM BAA side, that BPA DGAP, all of that would be handled by the WEIM entity and then represented in the base schedule they're submitting as part of EIM participation, and there would be no settlement impact. So just wanted to kind of reiterate that that's how this works right now.
Thank you, Danny. That was very important remark here. We assumed also in this example here that these schedules for G3, G4, and G5 are base schedules, and also the MSR of 100 megawatts is also a base schedule because BPA is using base schedules to balance their system. So without any additional economic activity on the BPA side, then nothing is triggering a settlement for imbalance in BPA. The only imbalance energy settlement is for G1 and for G2 for the increase of 6 megawatts and reduce of 6 megawatts from the day ahead respectively.
Thanks, George. And I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, but I think we'll take a moment here and take a short break.
Oh, yes, I need it.
So we'll return here at approximately 3:05. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to be getting started here again shortly. Welcome back from break, everyone. We're going to be getting started here again with George.
Hello again. So now that we saw how this plays out for the existing SPTI, we'll see how it works for the same example, exactly the same example, but using the BPA DGAP Malin 500 gap tie. And then we'll compare the two. So same setup as before, same bids for the generators, everything is the same. However, now the system resource for the import is using the BPA DGAP tie model. So that means that we'll distribute its schedule not to the Malin 5N01 bus, but to the BPA DGAP, using again the same distribution factors we've been using so far for the DGAP, 0.5, 0.3, and 0.2. And by the way, if somebody was questioning or wondering, where do we get these distribution factors? So we actually adapt them historically over a long time from our state estimator solution in real time. So they're realistic to a certain sense. Of course, we have different sets for seasonal, on-peak, off-peak, et cetera, et cetera. So they do represent some semblance of reality of how the actual generation will play out in real time for each PAA. And our state estimator is the best tool that we have for that. So in this example, going back to it, and I'd like to minimize this. There we go. So the only difference is that the 100 megawatt import from the SR1 that will clear the market first at $10, it will be distributed to the BPA DGAP. So instead of having a shift factor of 0.4 to path 26, we'll have the same shift factor as the DGAP, which is 0.34. So doing this solution now with this change, try to find the solution for the day-ahead market. If we do the same calculations as before, we find this solution, and it's almost the same, what we had before. But you can see that the solution for G1 and G2 is 556 megawatts and 344 megawatts. We have seen these numbers before. This was the dispatch that we saw in real time when we were using the SPTI. So this was the effective solution that real time reached. So using the BPA DGAP Malin 500 gap tie, we actually find this solution all the way in day ahead. We find the effective solution in the day ahead by using the DGAP as the injection point, because it corresponds to how the energy is going to be distributed in real time. Meaning we have a power flow contribution on path 26 that it's more realistic. What you get in day ahead is what you'll see in real time in this example, if everything else stays the same, of course. So if you go ahead now and see what happens in real time with the assumption that nothing changes in real time in terms of demand forecast and bids, real time will come back with exactly the same solution. So there's not even imbalances for G1 and G2 because they were optimally scheduled all the way from the day ahead. The only Difference that you will see here between the solutions for the existing SP tie and the dig-up tie is that the LMP for the system resource is not at $21 because we're not using now 0.4 as its shift factor. It's just using the dig-up. So with the 0.34 shift factor, it's even higher than before a little bit. Instead of $21, it's 21.6 because it's a little bit more electrically distant at the BPA dig-up than the Malin 5 NO1 bus, so it gets less of the marginal congestion contribution for causing congestion on path 26. This is important in considerations of how you're going to potentially hedge for the schedule. We're not going to discuss CRRs or RA in this first workshop, but we'll come back to discuss those items later on. So it's important to know that if you have a day-ahead solution that is closer to the real-time solution, then if you're hedging for that solution, you're actually partially hedging also for what real-time will throw at you. And here we're showing that your real-time solution is going to be identical to the day-ahead solution. Something to note. So let me pause here for a moment and see if there are any reactions so far or comments or questions.
Thanks, George. Yeah, we'll pause here for a moment. Not seeing any questions coming in. Just a reminder to folks that to raise your hand, the raise hand icon is on the bottom left. And if you're having trouble raising your hand, you can always type in a question via chat and we'll read your question. Not seeing any questions. Oh, we did actually just receive one.
Just wait, Kelly. Let me conclude here because I didn't mention this. So again, it's very important to consider the fact that the mirror system resource that we're using in real time to mirror the day-ahead schedule is distributed at exactly the same location that you're using for modeling the day-ahead schedule. So since the day-ahead schedule here using the dig-up tie for the distribution, the mirror system resource is also using the dig-up tie. They're always at the same location to achieve the intended effect of having the mirror system resource injection canceling in power flow calculations the schedule that cleared the day ahead, so that the representation in real time is really coming from where the actual generation is, in this case, the BPA dig-up. Yeah, Callie, go ahead.
Can we please unmute Callie?
WPTF, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, George, for walking through all of this. I was trying to kind of flip back and forth between the slides and see if I can see any differences between the two, and maybe you have a slide coming up or you can help me. Did I see, are there dispatch differences when you compare the IFM solution between the two? Because I thought I saw, and I don't know if maybe if that is the case, can you help me understand why there's that difference?
So what we're showing here is that with the assumption that going from day ahead to real time, things don't change, like the demand forecast is the same and the bits are the same. What we showed is that using the existing SPTI, you actually do have imbalances in real time. Your real-time solution is slightly different. It's actually more cost-effective because the power flows represent a little bit, they're closer to reality. And so whatever day ahead is modeling, perhaps with less accuracy, real-time corrects for it. So there is a difference there. When we use the dig-up tie, there is no difference. Whatever you get in the day ahead flows seamlessly in real time. You have exactly the same solution if everything stays the same. So essentially, you achieve the more efficient cost from a cost perspective solution already from the day ahead. So there's nothing to redispatch. There's no error in the day ahead to be corrected in real time. That's one of the pointers that I'll be making in the next slide.
Yeah, and I appreciate all that. I was talking about the differences between the IFM solution under the SP tie and the IM solution under the IFM solution under the DCAP. So like if we were to compare the existing
Yeah,
IFM dispatch
yeah,
to if we move to the DGAP. Are you going to get there? If so, I apologize and I will wait.
oh, that's okay. I mean, that was the whole point of the exercise here, essentially to show how SPTI plays, how DGAP plays, and then compare the two. So on the next slide, I summarize the conclusions.
Okay,
Is that what you want to see?
Well, yeah, I thought I saw differences in dispatches between the two IFM scenarios. So I was just trying to figure out why. But if you're going to get to that, by all means, go for it, and I'll wait.
Yes, there is a difference. There's a difference because using the DGAP in the day ahead has a more realistic representation of the power flows. So whatever correction the real-time market performs on the day-ahead solution when you use the existing SPTI is not necessary if you use the DGAP tie, because you find the day-ahead solution to already represent your real-time solution. So going from day-ahead to real-time using the existing SPTI, there is a change, there is an imbalance and a correction, but I consider it to the day-ahead solution. If you're using the DGAP tie, there is no change going from day-ahead to real-time because there's no correction to be made. Your day-ahead results already comport to the real-time solution.
Yeah, I'll wait till you get through your summary slide and see if my question is answered. Because I think maybe we're talking past each other. It's fine. There's lots of numbers, lots of different scenarios. I'll wait and see if it's answered.
Sure, and I kind of made the summary already. That's fine. Do we have another question? I can go to it.
Yeah, so we had another question from Robert Fisher in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
He asked, how will an export be distributed within California? But will you be getting to this on your next slide as well?
How will an export be distributed with California? So the export from CAISO, the California ISO Balancing Authority area, not the California state, if that's what you're asking, Robert, is going to be distributed exactly the same way like we distribute the import. Of course, the sign is different. So a 100 megawatt import will be distributed as 100 megawatt distributed generation on the BPA DGAP. A 100 megawatt export will be distributed as 100 megawatt reduction in generation on the BPA DGAP. I have a set of examples at the end of the presentation that exactly play out the same example with having a 100 megawatt export instead of a 100 megawatt import, so you can see there the effects. They tell the same story, so I was going to show them quickly but not walk through them in this workshop because it's the same story that is told for the import. It's very similar for the export, just the sign, some signs change because the energy is going the opposite way. But other than that, it's the same.
Thank you. And we did just get another hand raised from Kathleen Colbert.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, great. Yeah, I'm unmuted, Kathleen from Sistra. No, thanks for that, George. Maybe super simple clarifying question on what you just answered. So as far as the distribution goes for import or export from CAISO, the distribution factors that you're using, can you just clarify which distribution factors?
Yeah, so in our examples, we were using a set of distribution factors that distribute generation to the DGAP, 50% for G3, 30% for G4, and 20% for G5.
Yeah, I meant more just generally. I heard you answered generation distribution factors. Less caring about the specifics of the example, more just generic.
General.
So, okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, I did mention that we adapt them historically over a long period of time from our state estimator solution for HBAA. We have generation distribution factors that reflect your real-time generation distribution specific sectors of time, like seasonally, on-peak, off-peak, etc.
Yeah, understood. So on the export side, are you saying you would still be using the GDS, or why wouldn't we be using the load distribution factors?
No, the logic is the same. We're using exactly the same distribution factors, but what you distribute is an algebraic number. It's positive for an import, so it's additional generation. It's negative for an export, so it's absorption of energy, so, but it's the same distribution.
Okay, I'll think about it more. Thanks.
Yeah, and as I said to Robert, there is a set of examples which play out the same scenarios here, but instead of having an input of 100 megawatts, I have an export from the ISO for 100 megawatts, and you can see how those play out for an export. And as I said to Robert, they tell the same story, these examples, so we're not going to really walk through them. I added them for your perusal and for information.
Thank you. And Robert raised his hand briefly, but then he lowered it, so I think he'll probably wait till you get to your later slides.
Okay,
and I'm not seeing any other questions at this time, so.
All right, so we talked a little bit about this, and this slide really compares the use of the existing SP tie versus the cap tie. So what we have seen through the exams and what we have discussed and presented in previous workshops in the past was that the distribution of the intertie schedule to the D-gap in this case results in a more realistic power flow in day-ahead market, and that's why when we transition to the real-time market from that solution, there's less imbalance distribution, less of an error for the real-time market to correct. In our examples, there was no correction actually at all, with everything assumed to be the same from day-ahead to real-time when we use the gap. What does it mean to have a more realistic power flow in the day-ahead market? As we have said in the past, this results in a significant improvement in the power flow and market solution accuracy. Those go together because power flow is used to perform congestion management and affects the market solution and affects the prices as well. So with a more realistic power flow in the day-ahead market, we have an improved alignment with actual power flow. And we have seen this in our examples using the D-gap. We had the same power flow that's sold in real time. We had it already in the day ahead. So we have fully aligned power flow in that example for path 26. Having a good alignment with actual power flow is advantageous from a number of points. You have reduced need and cost for congestion management in real time. As you saw, real-time congestion management with using the D-gap was nil. There was no cost. You already had solved that in the day ahead. There was no deviation. In certain scenarios, the congestion may even go away in real time. Remember in our examples, when we used the D-gap, there was a 6 megawatt room on the flow of path 26 that was created because we're using more accurate shift factors. And in this example, we had the same bit, so that was filled, so you had an economic benefit and an effective solution by shifting generation from G2 to G1. In other scenarios, you could actually have this additional room on the constraint not hit the limit in real time, in which case congestion that you may have in the day ahead, which is an artifact of your modeling, will not exist in real time, will not materialize. This is the phenomenon of phantom congestion that we have discussed probably in the past, where you have artificial congestion in your day-ahead market solution because of some inaccuracies in the model you're using, but really there's no congestion that's going to happen in real time. And when you compare the day-ahead market solution, specifically the rack solution here, because we're talking about the demand forecast and the virtuals, blah, blah, then rack solution gives you a better representation of what you'll see in a real-time market solution. That's very important from an operational standpoint because you know what to expect in real time. And the reason for that is that you have really no structural difference between day-ahead and real-time market. As we said, and showed in the example, even if you're using the existing SP tie in the day-ahead market, when we go to real time, we shift that in the gap, in the D-gap. So if you do that already from the day ahead, then you don't introduce any structural difference between the markets. Whereas if you have a structural difference, then real-time market has to make a connection. And it's not good to have structural difference between markets from a market design standpoint, as you know, because any kind of structural difference, irrespective of other problems that it may cause for your market solution, it can also be an opportunity for market participants to manipulate the market, relying on structural differences between the markets. So I mentioned that you have more efficient congestion management using the DGAP, and that's because, again, it stems from the fact that you have more realistic power flow. So you have more efficient congestion management. You actually achieve the congestion management solution in real time. You get it already from the day ahead if you use the DGAP in the day ahead. That also affects the LMPs. As you saw in the examples, the system resource had an LMP of $21 in the day-ahead market using the existing SP tie, but that becomes $21.6 if you use the DGAP tie, which is actually the price that you're going to see in real time in this example. So you have also accurate marginal prices because congestion management affects the marginal congestion component of the LMP for these prices. From an operational standpoint, obviously, if you have a more realistic power flow in your market solution, then you have reduced need for conforming transmission limits in the market, where operators see a market solution, but they see something different in your state estimator or in your SCADA. And if there is a difference that is created by your models, then they attempt to correct for that difference by conforming transmission limits, manually biasing the market to get results that are more pragmatic. And of course, this manual intervention is something that needs to be kept at the minimum if possible, because we want to have a market solution that reflects the optimal solution from the market rather than intervention actions. And final but not least, we have also mentioned this in the past, the DGAP is not something new that is proposed here for EDAM. And actually, for the market solution, it's available and used in the Western Energy Balance Market today from 2014. And as I mentioned here, it's actually used even before that for distributing external generation to meet external demand, so that we have an accurate loop flow representation of our market solution in the day-ahead market. We do that already. And in the Western Energy Balance Market is used also for all market transactions that EIM BAAs have. So as it is right now, only the ISO Balancing Authority area employs the SP tie model with a concentrated distribution at the location of the intertie. All other BAAs, they use the gap tie model, where the distribution of the import or the export represents more accurately the source or the sink of that export for whatever BAA, in most cases the adjacent BAA that is in the picture. So I'm going to end here. This is our points that, at least from our perspective, clearly favor the use of the gap tie for the market solution, even for the ISO interties, not only for EIM and EDAM BAAs. Points that we have made in the past in previous workshops, and we show here in practical matters how they play out with examples. So I'll leave it open up for discussion at this point, and let's see what we have.
Thanks, George. We have a hand raised right now from Dan Williams. Go ahead, Dan.
I had questions actually for Milos more, but I guess I'll just take the opportunity to say thanks for going through some of the examples here. It's been helpful to sort of see the CAISO's view on this and how you look at the power flow modeling of it at a very high level. But the question for Milos is just sort of where we go from here. the kind of the standard CAISO process has sort of transitioned more to what I feel like we've been experiencing with the congestion revenue allocation phase 2 initiative, where Guillermo's been providing some great information that's sort of useful immediately for the market go live, but the policy aspect of it is starting with principles, going to go through some opportunity for stakeholders to comment, and then hopefully to make some presentations and really have a full dialogue before moving on to the CAISO straw proposal and kind of the policy setting piece. And I'm it's good to hear CAISO's thought on this in this sort of wrap up slide, but it also feels a bit like you've reached your conclusion and we're being led to that conclusion versus starting a stakeholder process to really get all the information out there and kind of see how this fits in for the the markets that we're building towards over the next couple of years. So sort of how do you see the process playing out from here, and any response to that?
Yeah, and I think maybe if Christina, if you jump onto slide 28, I don't know, George, if you were thinking later on going off on, you can use his slide.
Maybe I can make a little window here on the remaining slides, and then I'll give it to you.
And just to answer.
Yeah, just don't page through them. I just want to say that I included the same example here for an export, and I'm not going to walk through it. It's the other side of the coin, but it is the same coin. It tells the same story, so that's why we won't bother you walking through that. I included it just for your perusal and to answer questions that we received here. How does this work for exports? So you can look at these examples and see how it works for exports. So, Milos, yours.
Yeah, no, thank you, George.
Thanks, George. I wasn't meaning to push you past those slides. It's just, it seemed like the right time to ask the question. So feel free to go back to them if there's other questions, but go ahead, Milos.
No, I wanted to skip over them. That was the original plan. They really say the same story. I mean, some numbers change, of course, some change sign, but it's really the same outcome. So I'm not going to really take time from you to walk through them. You can do it at your own pace. I included them for your information and simply to be able to tell you, okay, this is how it works for exports, and it's not really different than imports. That's all.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, George, and thank you, Dan, for the question. I think in terms of where we go from here, the intent of today's workshop really was to provide an educational session on how does the current design work compared to the GAP-DI design, what are the differences, and illustrate that through the examples, why we think this is more accurate, recognizing that the GAP-DI design is already in place in the EIM. And in our mind, the question is, do we move to the GAP-DI design for the CAISO Intertie, or are there what are the additional issues that need to be resolved for us to figure out how best to improve the modeling of intertie transactions on the CAISO Interties? The GAP-DI is one way of doing that. I think ideally there's consistency between the modeling of intertie transactions across the wider market footprint rather than coming up with a third option or some other design for the CAISO balancing area. So ideally we can migrate to the GAP-DI design and address any of the other lingering issues that relate to that are, I think, unique to the CAISO balancing area. But certainly, I think there's room here, which is why on this slide we wanted to talk about, are there different aspects that should be considered? What are all the other different considerations that need to be accounted for in order to make an informed evaluation with stakeholders on the modeling design, but also what are the potential effects on the commercial arrangements that may exist. And so we're certainly open to stakeholder input. This is where, as I noted at the beginning, I wanted to take a little bit of time, having walked through now the educational discussion. Where should we take this from here? Is there additional open items, additional questions, additional education that we can do with related to the GAP-DI design? I think we can certainly allow room for stakeholders to present their scenarios or concerns or ideas on the gap tie design, but there are some critical questions, I think, as we evaluate these modeling designs that we'll need to talk through, including what I have here. Resource adequacy imports under the gap tie design. Are there key issues that need to be resolved there? How would it work under the gap tie design? I think that will guide us on, are there issues that cannot be overcome or can be addressed in a different way? There's also alignment with congestion revenue rights. If you go down the gap tie design, how do you do that alignment with CRRs? Are there potential other issues that need to be resolved that arise as a result of moving to a different gap tie design than the existing design? And even independent of that, are there policy issues that need to be addressed, recognizing the current structure for modeling those intertie transactions? So I think here we're looking for stakeholder input. Where do we want to take this? If there are different ideas, different concepts that somebody wants to introduce, I think we're certainly open to hearing that. But I think one of the key things that we need to keep in mind as well is creating as much consistency as possible across the wider market footprint, which is why we're suggesting that we should really consider this gap tie design for the CAISO, as was the intent of the original design. But if there are certain different options, different issues that need to be addressed within that, or different considerations, we're certainly open to that and inviting stakeholders to present as well. And that's where we wanted your input, whether today or whether in the written comments that we've put a comment deadline here, help us shape where do we take this from now, whether it's from an educational perspective, how do we talk about some of these issues, and I took some notes here of certain things that we can elaborate more on in the next set of workshops, but also ancillary topics that directly relate to or are directly impacted by the way that you model intertie schedule. So we're starting here with a starting point of what we have in place today, what's in place on the broader EDAM footprint, but there's certainly room here to consider different concepts and different issues that need to be addressed as considered when evaluating how to improve that modeling accuracy on the CAISO interties in particular. I don't know if that answered your question, Dan, but certainly if you have any interest in presenting or talking through the comparison from your perspective, from somebody who transacts in the markets, I think there's room to do that in the upcoming April workshops. Maybe we can open it up for Dan just to see if he's got any thoughts.
Could we please unmute Dan one more time to see if he has a response?
Yeah, thank you. And I forgot to introduce myself, Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. So that all is really helpful, Milos, and I think what I'll try and do, and other stakeholders can kind of take their paths as they will, but I'll try and split questions out in comments into maybe some clarifications for the immediate model applicability within EDAM for the go live. So sort of the transitional design that we have, and then kind of focus some also on the longer term, and hopefully then when we get together in April, we can have some more discussion around whether you have full stakeholder support to just kind of push forward, or if we need to spend more time in the process to really understand the impacts in more complex examples, and in a sort of in the context of a growing EDAM footprint and a changing CAISO intertie topology over the next couple of years. So I'll put that stuff in comments, and look forward to hearing what others have for thoughts on it as well.
No, that sounds great, Dan, and like you said, we don't want to push forward here as in a way as to force this upon stakeholders. We recognize, and that's why in these next two workshops, we've got certain things that we want to evaluate, make sure that everybody's coming along with us and figuring out how do we address these issues under different modeling designs. But one of the key things that will be important to address is, okay, under the gap tie design, how do resource adequacy imports comport? How are they delivered? Where are they? How are they bid? Where are they bid? Making sure that there's common understanding on that. Does that work? Are there issues that need to be addressed with that under this particular approach to the design of modeling intertie schedules? And then same on the CRR. So any questions, any ideas, any concepts that you want further discussed in the workshops, certainly welcome that, and we want to make sure we're thorough, and we're walking step by step so that whatever design ultimately we end up with on the modeling, that it's very clear how different pieces are going to work together. I fully expect along the way that we'll identify some larger policy issues that we may need to consider as well, particularly related to RA, particularly related to transactions on EDM interties. And so the intent is to work together to identify those and then try to close them through these stakeholder discussions.
And it looks like Danny Johnson from CAISO has his hand up to add in.
And kind of asking a question back to Dan, I guess when we originally thought about the gap tie design, it has clear accuracy benefits that materialize in two ways, right? You get a better power flow. That's better congestion management, better pricing within the market settled footprint. So that's appealing. But then you ask a deeper question of why do we even perform congestion management in the first place? And that's to align the market results with the transmission security that's necessary on the BES. So as we've thought about it, like this does at least seem to the ISO as a clear improvement for congestion management and price formation, as well as reliability. Understanding there's a ton of commercial considerations. I think that's, as Milos articulated, why we are taking this transitional period to try to make sure we can accommodate. But like, as you kind of think through your comments, we do want to prioritize accurate price formation and better reliability. And to the extent we get the power flow more accurate, we think that's a good way to accomplish both of those goals. So thank you.
Thanks, Danny. And we have a couple more questions. First, we'll go to the written question that we had from Carl Dunkel-Werner, saying, I'm hoping to understand which generators are included in the gap. Is it always the generation distribution factors you discussed with Kathleen? Could there ever be a case where the electricity flows at an intertie has two different gap tie prices at the same time?
Yeah, so it depends on the gap. So if we're talking about the default generation aggregation point, it's all the supply resources in the BAA that is considered to be the source or the sink for the input or the export respectively. And the shift factors the generation distribution factors may change from season to season or on peak, off peak, as I mentioned earlier, based on the information that we extract from a state estimator solution over a historically long period of time. Now, are these the only generation distribution factors for this D gap? Yes. For the D gap, yes. Now, if in the future workshop will talk about other options for the gap, because you may have other options besides the D gap, then for other gaps, there is a specific set of distribution factors for that distribution. It could be different than the default gap, because we have what we call custom gaps, or C gaps. These represent a set of supply resources which do not span over the entire BAA, over the whole generation fleet of a balancing authority area, because for specific cases where a scheduling coordinator has more granular knowledge of where the source of the energy for an import or the sink for an export is actually in reality, and we can represent that to the day-ahead market to increase accuracy for these specific transactions. So it really goes with the gap. But this model, the gap tie model, as we have said in the past, it's very flexible. And we want to have that flexibility to address situations where the participant has better knowledge about the distribution of the actual energy for the import and export. We'd like to capture that by defining specific custom gaps for those cases. And the distribution factors for those will reflect the distribution of the actual generation for these particular cases.
Thank you, George. Now we have a couple more hands raised. First, we'll go to Joe Liu. Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, this is Joe Liu from CDWR. So if we want to use the gap ties to test out imports and exports, where are we supposed to do that? Because it sounds like we're going to go straight to transition period, but the gap ties for BAAs that are not Pacific Core, so say LEDWP, Bank, those are not available for scheduling. Is there going to be anywhere we're going to be able to test out using the gap ties in MapStage? And when would that be?
If I'm going to theorize here is that before we bring to production a market feature that affects how participants schedule or bid, it's customary to perform a market simulation. So my understanding is that going forward with the gap tie model, there will be a point before we go into production with it, we're going to have a market simulation for participants to acquire experience and knowledge about how to use it.
That doesn't, apologies, that doesn't seem to match what I understand, because my understanding is May 1, we're going to immediately go to transition period where both gap ties and SP ties are all available. So that means there was never a map stage where the gap ties were going to be available for us to actually try out. Did I misunderstand that?
Well, we backtracked from that position with the transitional period that maintains the status quo for some time. During this time, I believe it's expected that we will have a market simulation period before we go to production with the gap tie model for all the reasons that I mentioned.
Yeah, so if it helps, for the CAISO Interties, the transition period really represents that we're staying with the status quo and not implementing the gap tie design. To the extent that through this stakeholder process, we ultimately determine to implement that gap tie design for the CAISO Interties, at that point in time, we will identify a commensurate market simulation period. But at this point, status quo on the CAISO Interties with the SP tie model. We did note separately through the EDAM implementation workshop that we will post advisory pricing information, and correct me if I'm wrong, George and James, for gap ties so that folks can compare the SP tie price to a potential gap tie price, but there's no transactions on the CAISO Interties under the gap tie model. We're staying with the SP tie model through the transition period until we change that to the extent that we evolve it through this process and move to gap ties. At that point, there will be market simulation for stakeholders to test.
So in summary, during the transition period, we will be able to see pricing, but we'll wait for another map stage to actually test out transactions. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Robert Fisher. Go ahead, Robert.
Hi, this is Robert Fisher from Energy. Thanks for putting this together, George. Appreciate it, and thanks for the presentation today. In regards to my export question, I'm a little confused because you have the exports decreasing the generation within BPA. Isn't that inaccurate? Wouldn't you be increasing generation within CAISO?
For an export, you have both effects happening. In the day-ahead market, yes, there will be increased supply in the ISO Balancing Authority area to balance that export. When you go in real time, that energy has to be absorbed from the BAA that is the sink that's absorbing the energy. So if it is the BPA dig-up that we're using, then it will be absorbed by the dig-up by essentially redispatching BPA generation using bids. In this example, we didn't have bids. We used the dig-up and the distribution factors from the dig-up to do that. In the later section with the export examples, you will see that. But in general, we run a real-time market, so actually you'll be using the bids for these BPA generators that participate in the market to actually absorb that import into BPA, which is reflected at the mirror system resource that we'll use to mirror the export from the ISO.
But wouldn't that be counterintuitive on your Path 26 example? Now you're making the Path 26 flows inaccurate because it's really just an import from California with increased generation in California. The generation would still be the same. So you're basically counterflowing that path 26 that you said was better with gap tie versus SP tie.
You have exactly the same outcome, Robert. I didn't present and didn't walk through the examples with the export. If you go to those slides and have a look, you'll see that your optimal solution with the export has higher generation schedules for the G1 and G2 generators. You know, it's 100 megawatt extra, so you have an additional 100 megawatt generation to cover the export in addition to the demand forecast. And you will see that there is also effective congestion management on path 26 in these solutions as well, using the decap.
But not quite the way I'm seeing it, but I'll review it. I just want to be quick because I got a couple of questions.
Yeah, other side is the other side of the same coin that says the same story, and I don't want to, you know, eat 1 hour of your time here going through this.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to try and be brief about
I think I inflicted in adequate pain here, so I'm just going to leave it up to you to look through them.
My next question is, if you're distributing these tie schedules to the generators, now what happens if one of the generators is at Pmax and you distribute additional energy? Aren't you going to be creating congestion on that resource?
So this is a theoretical question, of course. In the day ahead, yes, we're using a fixed generation schedule for the external systems because they don't participate in the market. They don't have bids to rely on the market to adjust them optimally, subject to their resource constraints. So there we do rudimentary distribution using the distribution factors. And because always the import or export in practical terms, the import and export that needs to be distributed is much smaller compared to the base generation for these external systems that is there in place to meet their demand forecast. So it's unlikely that we're going to hit the specific generation limits in that distribution. And as I said, that distribution really reflects from the state estimator solution as adapted to long period of time, realistic distribution of that generation, which is, of course, should be feasible. Of course, if you happen to have an outage at the generator, we do take that into consideration by renormalizing the generation distribution factors to take consideration of that outage. So we do all that is humanly possible to represent the distribution in a more accurate way that we have. But of course, you know, it's an estimate because you don't know what's going to happen in real time. This is all the information you have from the day ahead.
Yeah.
We're using the best available information. We don't expect for these limits to be hit, but even if you hit a limit, and let's say you do some distribution to a generator that the distributed energy pushes its schedule above, let's say, the Pmax, I don't think it's the end of the world. You're not optimizing schedules in that external BAA. You're not doing congestion management. You know,
real time is more my concern. Real time is more my concern, or an entity that is in EM would also be my concern as well.
Of course, but real time we don't have a problem, right? Because in real time, you're not distributing with fixed. Let me explain. In real time, you don't use the fixed distribution factors that you have to use in the day ahead because you don't have that BAA in the market. In real time, that BAA is in the market unless it's a non-EIM BAA, but most of the EIM BAAs are in the market. Most of the BAAs in the real time are in the market. So you're actually going to be optimally dispatching that generator or all these generators in that market that they participate with bids. So you will solve the problem optimally. So you won't hit any limits or violate any resource limits and everything. So in real-time market, there is no problem. And if it's a non-EIM BAA, also not a problem because you don't solve the non-EIM BAA in the market. So you don't care. You just need to have an estimate of the representation of their supply so that you account as much as possible for your loop flows through your system, through the market from these external generations. So I don't think we have a problem here. The only problem of accuracy like that is in the day ahead, where we have to rely on some distribution factors, and of course there is some grain of salt in the accuracy of the distribution factors you're going to use in the 1 day ahead before the actual real time happens, right? So.
Yeah, I can kind of see it being a little bit different, because when you do that injection into the generator and it is putting it into the power flow, you may be creating shift factors and getting over the 85% and also causing binding transmission constraints that need to be mitigated. So you potentially could cause that transmission or elements near those generators to cause additional transmission constraints to mitigate. But anyway, we can discuss that at some other point in time. But I just have one last thing. Go ahead.
Just on this, let me rebuttal. So yes, I agree with you that the distribution factors, they're not going to be accurate. As I said, it's an estimate. But if you look at how the system distributes the energy to all the supply resources in a BAA, like the BPA dig up here includes all the supply resources. If you have some small variance of the distribution factors, the average aggregate shift factor is not going to be impacted by an amount that would be a concern for the loop flow that we represent in our system. I think it's
depending on the size of your intertie schedule, though, right?
No, I'm just talking about the dig up that includes your demand forecast. That's the main part. The import-export is just a delta on that.
Okay.
So let's put it this way. I am not concerned.
I do have some concern. But anyway, my last is request. I really would like to see a real-time example where the constraint is binding and how it affects the pricing and the generation being distributed or being optimized within real-time or another EDAM area. Because once that constraint binds, I have concerns in regards to how it will affect the generation distribution or generation dispatch in that example. So if, as part of your last slide that you were showing, requests in regards to things that you would like to see, I would like to see how constraint buying affects those real-time the generation schedules. And I would also like to see a multiple bid example at an intertie to make sure that priority scheduling is done as accurately as possible and it's not affecting other BA solutions.
So on the first question, basically you're looking at this solution, but instead of having a distribution based on the dig up, use actual bids for generators G3, G4, and G5 to do an optimal dispatch. Right? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking if the intertie were binding. So say Mullen's limit in your example here is 100 megawatts.
You mean the intertie scheduling limit?
Yes. So when that intertie scheduling limit binds, how it's going to affect the solution. If you could provide an example in the next, that would be wonderful. And then also my other request would be multiple priorities bidding and how that curtailment would go through and how it affects the other areas' pricing. Because this is really, to me, becoming a price formation aspect. Yeah, exactly. So if you have LPT, PT, wheel, all the flavors.
Yeah, we can expand these examples because they already have a good setup to cover the case that you have a binding intertie schedule limit, so its effect on the LMPs. As I mentioned earlier, we didn't bring it into the discussion today because it affects the SP tie and the dig up the same way, so it wasn't a factor for comparison, but it will be good to see how it affects prices because it's part of the price formation. So we can show that by adding an intertie scheduling limit. We have to add another import or another export for that so that there is competition for that import. And
Thank you so much, George.
Right.
Well, the other example is the priorities.
With self-schedules. So basically, instead of having bids at the intertie, you have self-schedules. That's easy now. Isn't that trivial, Robert? Because the higher priority is going to be scheduled first, and then the balance is going to be taken by the other resource. I don't think it will add too much value to do this. I understand,
But the
the
shadow price in those circumstances might affect the other BA area.
Okay, we'll look into this, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Robert, and I took some notes. We'll make sure that for the next discussion, we can include some of those examples. And then if you wouldn't mind, add that into your written comments as well, but we'll make sure that we want to walk through as many of these comprehensive examples and address any lingering concerns, or at least help illuminate the differences between the designs. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Robert. And we just have one more question from Hui Yuan. He wrote in the chat, could CAISO publish the generation distribution factor for DGAP similar to the load distribution factors currently published in the market modeling data section of market participant portal?
Yeah, so we took an action item to do that. I don't know if it's going to be in the market participant portal. For the distribution factors, yes. For the definition of the gaps, I think it will be in the static definition that we have on the Excel spreadsheet with defined A nodes. There is already one. We need to add a tab for the gaps. But for the distribution factors, because they change potentially, because of outages, things like that, I agree. We should publish it the same way we publish the load distribution factors. It's the same kind of data. So we took an action item to do that, and we'll report on that in the next workshop.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue, so I'll turn it over to Milos.
Okay, yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, but I just want to spend a couple more minutes just on the upcoming workshops. Like I said, we're taking stakeholder comments by April 1st. The comment template has been posted, and within it, I think we explicitly ask what type of, based on this discussion, what type of topics would you like to see discussed at the next meeting? I think we can plan, and we may have a couple of workshops in April, depending on the feedback we get and just the meatiness of the topics. But I think we want to continue this educational discussion and try to have some additional variations to the examples that Robert and others have noted throughout the discussion. I think Tong Wu also had an example that he was going to reach out to us about crafting that we could, I think, more publicly talk through. I think Josh Arnold at the beginning also suggested that maybe we illustrate how things would work under the gap die design when the generation is not necessarily from an adjacent BA, but maybe a couple of BAs out. We could certainly walk through that as well. So anything else that kind of comes out from this educational discussion that would be helpful to further illustrate and walk through scenarios, we certainly encourage you to suggest that in comments. I think at the next workshop as well, or the next couple of workshops, across the next couple of workshops that we'll have, I think we want to then also shift to talking a little bit about, in this context of intertie schedule modeling, but transactions at EDAM internal interties. And we know that there's been a number of questions about bidding and retaining bidding at those locations, but with the EDAM, the bidding at those locations really goes away. We allowed on a transitional basis in limited instances to have bidding at those locations, but I think we want to talk through that as well, stakeholder concerns or how alternatively things could work that traditionally are transactions at those EDAM internal interties. So we want to spend time talking about that, as well as resource adequacy, import deliveries under specific scenarios at those gap tie interties or under alternative designs. What does RA import bidding look like at those locations? How does it change in terms of what you have to show? Do you know the source? If you don't know the source, how those transactions for RA import occurs under that gap tie design. Also talking through alignment with congestion revenue rights under the gap tie modeling design. And then certainly as we go through this, if there are any additional or larger policy design issues or issues that or considerations that arise, we want to flag those and make sure that we have a forum to talk through them. We also want to then keep this discussion going beyond April, but also into May, and if necessary, beyond that as well, before we kind of start putting pen to paper. But in May workshops, also continue to talk about any aspects that maybe we didn't have an opportunity to or didn't finish out in April, but create time for that in May workshops, and like I said, maybe even into June and beyond, to the extent that We're having robust discussions on a number of topic areas. And at that point in time, start shaping what those key policy issues are, alternatives, and topics that need to have a proposal around to be able to address and present for ultimate decision as we go along. But certainly encourage you to submit comments on the topic areas that would be good to address, that either comes out of this discussion or independent of this discussion that relates to Intertie modeling. Submit that in your comments, and feel free to reach out to us as well offline with any specific scenarios, specific questions that can shape the upcoming workshops. I think we can expect after the comments come in, fairly soon after that, that we'll start scheduling the April and the May workshops to start putting that on our calendars and start working through the scenarios and start talking through any of these policy-related topics. Let's open it up still if there are any questions, comments, anything that anybody wants to raise before I turn it over to you, Christina.
Thanks, Milosh. Taking a final look here, I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I'll give it a moment. Yeah, no further questions coming in at this time.
Okay, so with that, just want to extend our appreciation to everybody that stuck through this initial discussion. Take a look at the slides. The slides are posted. There will be a recording as well. We didn't go through the export examples, but those are illustrated. I think George talked to them at a high level, but if there are any questions coming out, any of these examples before the next workshops, feel free to reach out to us, either to stakeholder affairs, to your customer service representatives, or if you know any of us directly, feel free to reach out with any of those questions. And anything else that you may need prior to shaping your comments, we really want to make sure that your input is what shapes these next set of workshops and what would be helpful to discuss. So don't be shy, feel free to reach out. And again, thank you for sticking with us today, and I'll turn it over to Christina.
Thanks, Milosh, and thank you, George. Now I just have a couple of quick announcements to share before we wrap up. Here you can see some of the stakeholder meetings, comment deadlines occurring this week at the ISO, as well as the training. Here's some details on market simulation meetings and business practice manual updates. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, where you can always subscribe. Here you can see some of our latest blog posts. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's meeting. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. All meeting materials are available on the initiative webpage. And as Milosh mentioned, the comment template is up and comments are due April 1st. The video recording will be posted there shortly as well. We thank you very much. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.